Welcome everyone to another episode of the Mind Sculptors podcast. I am your host Callahan, and today we are doing something a little bit different. Today we'll be traveling back almost 2 years and revisiting my conversation with Cobblepott about deck building philosophy, which also coincidentally is our very first episode of the show. But before we jump into that, I do want to take a moment to thank our patrons for all the support you give. Your support is what enables us to be able to continue the show and put on events like the MLC. One of the benefits of being a patron is access to our Discord server, where you can join our awesome community for all sorts of discussions around spoilers and deck building, and sometimes you can talk about sports. We do that there too. All that good stuff. The big change coming for patrons is that here soon we will be debuting a new segment called Dear Sculpty Boys, where you can write into the show and ask us for advice or our thoughts on decks, how to handle particular metas, card evaluations, all that jazz. This is going to be available to our patrons only. So if you want to get in on the action and have your questions answered, head on over to patreon.com/the Mind Sculptors and support us there. I also want to mention, don't forget to rate us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. That really helps us out on growing on those platforms as well. If you review us on Apple Podcasts, I'll make sure to give you a shout out in the next episode. Those sorts of things, as well as liking and subscribing on YouTube or leaving a comment on YouTube, are massively helpful and really help us grow as a channel and as a group so that we can continue to provide great content and hopefully benefits for you guys as supporters of the show. With all of that said, let's jump into my conversation with Cobblepott. You're like one of the people who a lot of people look to as like one of the big like deck building. You really push the boundaries with deck building. And so how did you even get into cEDH to begin with?
So I first learned about Commander from my brother-in-law, and he was way into it, and he had a group of friends who got together every week, and they played and they had a good time, and they invited me in, and I had a good time too and thought it was really great. And, being a kind of a internet savvy bookish person, I was always going around trying to find what was going on in MTG Salvation, which was the place to go back then for what was happening in EDH. And I discovered French or Dual Commander, which was kind of this little sub format that was taking place mainly in France, but also kind of there were little silos huddled together in a couple of other places, none in the US.
Of course.
There were some really, really cool things that people were doing. And it was sort of like a blending of what people had done in Legacy or Vintage, kind of using the card pool that was available to EDH. And obviously that's dual. So it wasn't a 4-player. So there was really heavy into things like Thoughtcast. You had your Thought Seas and your Inquisition of Kozilek, and the things that you don't see in EDH because it's heads up
stuff that looks a lot more like what you would see in Modern and Legacy as far as like hand disruption and things like that.
So when people today make comments about cEDH and say that, well, it's just like Vintage, go play Legacy. That argument holds water for French because the cards that C play are very similar. Whereas in 4-player, the what we use is very different because you want to use what is going to maintain value in a 4-player. But that was where I first started trying to push a little bit into the competitive stuff. And that was actually where Boone Weaver actually got started.
Oh man,
as well. So
I one of the guys in our local meta game for our local league still plays Carador Boone Weaver to this day.
Oh, sure.
And I mean, he'll knock out games. He'll always finish in like the top 10. Like, it's still a good deck.
I mean, so what happened was when partners came to be, I think it was within a month or two, we had partners and Protean Hulk got unbanned. Like, it was very, very close in time that those two events took place. And I mean, if you know the history of Boone Weaver, the idea is that you're really trying to approximate kind of what the degenerate stuff that people did with Protean Hulk. Right. And it's like, oh, well, if you use Pattern of Rebirth, you can kind of do this thing that's sort of similar and kind of the same idea. It's not as good, but getting Protean Hulk and getting partners to be able to get access to blue and be able to get access to a lot more card advantage to the corridor just never was able to get a hold of.
Yeah, it's very interesting how partners and like these good 5-color commanders have just warped the metagame. So
the thing that partners gives you is the flexibility to have access to color. I mean, in the old days before partners was a thing, you looked kind of on two axes. The one axis that you're looking at is, okay, what is the power that my commander is giving me? So you're looking at Zur, you're looking at Jaleva, you're looking at Corridor, and you've got that interesting ability that it's giving you, and then you've got kind of this set of colors that comes along for the ride. And you're trying to think of, okay, what sort of combos, what sort of patterns of play am I going to try to pull off that are going to fit with that ability that will also fit into that color set. And the advent of partners just allowed you to make those decisions separately instead of having one be dependent upon the other. So being able to say, I would like card advantage and curiosity engine, and also get to choose what colors it is that's actually going to be applied into. And I mean, it's no secret that has completely and utterly changed the way that people approach deck building.
And I mean, and that's really good because I mean, like, so one of the things we really, when we were talking before that I really wanted to talk about is really the deck building, how you make decks and how you brew. And so when it really comes into that, so you talked about how like, it changes the way that you're thinking and starting to strategize with, how you're going to start and build your decks. So for you, what is it that's that first thing that you really start with to build your deck around?
So when you're looking at the initial concept phase of a deck, there's you're either you're gonna do one of three things, let's say. So either you're starting with the commander, and the commander itself is giving you something that's really interesting or something that's really novel that you want to try to see the extent to which you can exploit it. Okay. So Yarok with the doubling ability, or Inala with her eminence ability. These are things that add a dimension to play that you don't get and you can't get with any other commander. Right. So sometimes I'll start with that if the commander is offering something that you literally can't get in any other circumstance. And so you've got that commander. Now that commander has chosen your color. And from there, that's kind of like chosen the trajectory that you're going to move. And then your choices from there are kind of how are you going to decorate that? How are you going to, what's the framework in which you're going to try to make that either as consistent or efficient as possible, or as reliable and resilient as possible? Those kinds of decisions then kind of dictate the rest of what goes into the deck. Right. If you're not starting with the commander, maybe you're starting with a combo. So like Shadowbag, for instance. Yeah. Shadowbag is really, it started in Yawgmoth just as a way of trying to improve the consistency with which you could win off of any of the spells that drew you into lots of cards. So whether it was Necropotence, or whether it was Ad Nauseam, or whether it was reanimating Villas and paying life into something, the idea with Shadow Bag was, okay, I've got some limited amount of mana and a lot of cards. What can I do to increase the chances that I can convert that into a win? Because sometimes people would do an Ad Naus, or especially if they did like a main phase Ad Naus, or they would do a Necro for 30 and be like, well, this isn't great. The idea with Shadow Bag, and if people aren't familiar with this, Shadow Bag is basically you're using Bone Miser, which is kind of like the mono black inverse Waste Knot. It's 5
fantastic.
Mana. Yeah, it's a 5 mana creature. It inhabits a style of play that's very similar to Gitrog, where if you've got a discard outlet, then a lot of the same sort of tricks that you can do with Gitrog, where if someone tries to interact with you and you just decide to discard again over the top of them and continue going, a lot of those same kind of things apply. But the idea is that because of the fact that you can choose with Bone Miser what it is that you're going to discard, as opposed to with Waste Knot. When people play Waste Knot, they'll do Waste Knot and then do a Wheel of Fortune, and it's kind of like a roll of the dice because they don't know what it is that other players are holding. They don't know what they're going to discard, if they're going to do some sort of like mass discard spell or something like that. Because you can choose to say, I'm going to discard a land here so that I know that I get 2 black, and then I'm going to cast this other card from my hand and then discard something after that. You can piece together a chain to win a lot more deterministically. Right. And then the Shadow and Bag come from Bag of Holding and Shadow of the Grave, which both basically just take a look at whatever cards you've discarded up until that point. You return all of them back to your hand and you can keep going. It's absolutely kind of a fringe combo, but it's very powerful if it's piloted capably. Yeah. But anyway, the idea was this was an interesting combo, and I found in Mono Black Yawgmoth that it really improved the post Naus or post Necro effectiveness of the deck. And I liked it, but I didn't like the fact that it was in Mono Black. So it was like, well, okay, so what can we do if we want to maybe transplant this apparatus into something else? What would be a good place for that to go? So this is, instead of starting with a commander, we're starting with a combo. Now we want to find the right home for that combo. So you want to think of, okay, well, what colors would be good? So in this case, it only needs Mono Black, but if we put it in a context that has blue, then it's going to have some better protection. If it's going to be in green, then some of the aspects of it that are for tutoring creatures are that's going to be more a little bit more refined than it was, and so on and so forth. So then I kind of transplanted that into Hapatra, which is the little snake god, and she brings to the table she brings a lot of creature tutors, which are useful for being able to either get Bone Miser into your hand, or get them cheat them onto the table and that kind of thing. But it also has crop rotation, which is crop rotation into Emergence Zone is very, very good with Necropotence, because it rather than playing Necropotence with Shimmermer or something like that, being able to cast all of your spells instead of just your artifacts winds up being pretty good.
Who would have thought?
Yeah, who would have thought? So, you can, if you look at the lists, I had probably 5 or 6 lists over the course of 2 or 3 months where I was just trying that combo in different housings with different colors to see what worked, really. And that's a thing that I think is that it's a good practice for everybody to try. We have something in, and we were tweeting about it a little bit actually earlier today, where and not just in cEDH, you see this in all the Magic communities, but cEDH especially, there's kind of like this elitism of, well, no, that's not good enough, or that's never going to work, that's not going to pan out. And also this idea of it's called functional fixedness, which means that things they can only be used for this one purpose.
Right.
And it's a kind of a pigeonholing way to think about things, and it limits your creativity in trying to do something that's in a new context. People aren't going to invent new things if they decide to not even try it, because they've already, before even starting, they've decided that it's not going to work.
Right.
So you have to be open-minded to try things that are likely to fail. And sometimes what happens is the thing that you were trying along the way winds up, revealing something else that you didn't set out to try to discover. That started happened with Curiosity. Like before the Curiosity control decks came out, there were a bunch of Curiosity decks that had to do with Firebrand Archer and Reckless Fireweaver and stuff like that, which were just almost like memes that I was trying in a couple of different decks. One of them was actually a Flash Hulk deck, and one of them was a Nekusar deck. And I mean, no, I don't play that deck anymore because it wasn't great, but it wound up spawning other ideas that I was able to carry through to other things. But then other people also said, well, okay, maybe we can use this a little bit. And you have other lists that materialize, they're using these little pieces of things that people tried from way back when, because they revealed stuff that actually wound up being good.
Right. So once you kind of come up with an idea like that, so whether it's, I want to build around a Yuriko, or I want to build around Curiosity, or I want to make a farm deck. When you're starting to now come and you're going, okay, how do I actually win the game? And I feel like everybody just kind of defaults to, oh, well, if you have blue and you have black, you can play Thassa's Oracle and Demonic Consultation. But, so outside of that, so what is it that you really do to like find the win conditions and all those things?
So depending on the kind of deck that you're playing, you're going to have kind of a different density of the kinds of things that you want to be doing. So in Advantage Thrasios, for instance, the goal of the deck is to be all about interacting with what everybody else is doing. It's, if there was a thesis to the deck, it's always have an answer. And you're all in on getting as much advantage out of Thrasios as you can, and then just keeping your hand stacked with all of the interaction as possible. So the idea in a deck like that is, well, I want to run way more. I want to commit a lot more slots to interaction than you might in your normal deck. You can think of it kind of like there's kind of the benchmark. If you look in the database for kind of the number of counter spells people tend to play, and the number of rocks people tend to play, and so on and so forth, and you kind of got this kind of like middle of the road benchmark for what is typical. And then you can shift slots in favor of one thing or another, depending on the style of gameplay that you want. So for Advantage Thrasios, you're pushing that number of slots that are committed to interaction higher.
Right.
And then, well, now you need to reclaim the slots that you've committed to that from someplace else. And one of the ways that you can do that is by choosing win cons that are also interaction. And it used to be, long ago that you kind of like, well, you had your combo pieces and you had your win cons, and they were always things that were separate from the nuts and bolts of how you protected that combo and how you interacted with the rest of the table. And part of that is just we've got cards that have been printed like Finale of Devastation, where it's like, oh, great, this is a utility card. This brings creatures back from the grave. It tutors creatures out. And it
does
also
everything
is
you
a
want
win
it to
con.
do.
Right. So rather than having a combo piece that does nothing until you're ready to combo out with it, I'm trying to think of the storm spell that is two black. Or sure, Grape Shot is one of them. Where if you're not ready to use it, it's a dead card, and you're not gonna.
You're talking about Tendrils.
Yes, okay. Tendrils. Thank you. Where that was a card that people ran, and they don't need to do that anymore because we've gotten cards that have been printed since then that allow us to really, really, rein in the number of slots that we have committed to winning, to committing more and more slots to being able to keep interactive with what's happening at the rest of the table. And I just want to say, with the printing of Opposition Agent,
oh my gosh,
that is going to, I think, require a shift in people's deck building philosophies, because if you are caught unawares, that card on its own, depending on how you've built your deck, if you've built your deck in a way that Oracle is your only win con, for instance, and you have nothing else, everything else are layers of ways to get to Oracle in different manners. If you happen to do a Vampiric Tutor and then someone snipes your Vampiric Tutor and orphans your Oracle, that's not a great place to be. So there's kind of this pendulum swing of being able to be greedier and greedier with the way that you are allocating your slots, and cards getting printed that punish people for being greedier and greedier with the way that they're allocating their slots.
Well, and you have to respect the 2 and a black anytime it's sitting up.
Absolutely.
And the biggest thing for me is I'm just like, is Imperial Seal good anymore?
Absolutely. What I would say is tutors are still going to be good. Tutors are always going to be good. I think that it's on the one hand, like I was saying, it's going to impact the way that people build their decks, just because they're going to be more prone to punishment when they get caught. That's just one piece of it, though. It doesn't mean that people aren't going to run tutors. It just means that people are going to play their tutors differently. They're going to be more conservative. They're going to be a little bit less cavalier about, looking around the table and saying, well, no, I'm just going to fire off my tutor here. Because there's this possibility that, okay, that person has access to black mana, and they've most, if you look at it today, okay, if you know that somebody is on blue and black and they've got 4 mana open, a lot of times you can kind of smell that there's a Notion Thief coming, when there's a Notion Thief on its way. People can, you can tell, and I think that people will gain that same sense with Opposition Agent as well.
So we're looking at these cards and the interaction slots and all these things. And one thing, especially when we're talking about this, because I think it's important, because I know when I started, it was a lot. I didn't understand this difference of the difference between a win condition and a combo.
Sure. A lot of times people will pair those together because, once someone has started their combo, that's when they win. But the combos are the set of cards that when they come together, they cause you to be able to end the game, but they're not necessarily the thing that wins you the game. So for instance, Leonin Relic Warder and Animate Dead. That creates an infinite combo where you've got an infinite number of sacrifices taking place, an infinite number of creature enter the battlefield, effects take place, and so on and so forth. But on its own, that doesn't win you the game. It just postures you to be able to win the game if you have something that maybe draws you a card whenever something gets sacrificed, or
Right.
Something that removes something that gains life or removes life when creatures die or something like that. So understanding the actual win con that you want is useful to help you to choose maybe the most efficient. When I say efficient here, I mean card efficient, as in most compact number of slots. Win apparatus, we'll say, and that's combo plus win con. And this, you a few minutes ago you said, well, are you playing blue and black? Then you might as well run Oracle Consultation. I mean, well, absolutely. It takes 3 slots up in your deck. 3 slots in your deck, and it's a combo and it's a win con. It's everything that you need it to be. Hyper efficient, both in slots and in mana cost, and it doesn't require any state. And that's another key piece to keep in mind when you're thinking about which combos you want, because you want your combos to be executable, kind of given a moment's notice. You've got the cards in hand. You want to be able to win. And that's kind of the reason why you don't really see Isochron Scepter and Dramatic Reversal as much as you used to, because, well, that's not a 0-state combo. That requires a good amount of setup to, and it's non-deterministic to be able to say, oh, I've got Dramatic Reversal in my hand. Now all I need is Isochron Scepter and I'm good. No, you also need to be able to have
positive.
Right. And that brings in another layer of the surfaces that you expose to other people to interact with.
Right.
So Isochron Scepter and Dramatic Reversal. Once you have your Scepter in play and you want to start your combo, the surfaces that you're exposing to your opponents are, well, there's a spell that I'm putting on the stack that I need to have resolve over and over again. If somebody can either limit the number of spells I can cast, or someone can counter my Dramatic Reversal, or someone can turn off my ability to activate artifacts, all of those things are going to shut off that combo right there. People with removal can remove Isochron Scepter.
Hey,
in response.
I have lost to an Abrupt Decay on the Isochron Scepter plenty of times.
People can remove the rocks that are, or the rocks or the dorks that are allowing you to be mana positive as well.
Right.
So there's all of these different surfaces that people can interact with to stop that combo. When you have something like Oracle plus Consultation, what surfaces do you have there? Well, you need to be able to cast 2 spells. So Rule of Law does hold that up quite well.
Right.
And you need access to 3 mana, and you need to have those spells resolve. So if people don't interact with those spells while they're on the stack, and you are able to get a creature enter the battlefield trigger, and no one has a Torpor Orb or something like that, then, well, there are no other surfaces for people to interact with.
Right.
So it's going to be highly resilient to people trying to stop it, and it's efficient. So it's the perfect storm of everything that you want to have in a win con,
right?
Which is why you see it so much, because if you have the choice, I mean, if you're in blue and black, it's a little bit dishonest intellectually to choose something else,
right,
for no other reason than, well, it's not Oracle combo.
So when we're looking at, the whole deck, we're building our deck. We've got our combo. We've got our win con. We've got all these things. So now obviously there's more to the deck than I have my combo and win con in my commander. Now I have, 85 cards to fill. How are we coming up with that?
So, what I do is, I keep kind of some spreadsheets that I keep on hand that are just like guys from Playing with Power. There's a number of resources that are out on the internet where people kind of have their staples lists and things like that. I keep a spreadsheet of the interaction that sees play, and the acceleration that keeps play, the tutors that see play, and so on and so forth, just as a starting point to kind of to fill in the initial composition. Okay. So and you're almost always going to take those kind of in the order of casting cost. For instance, you're going to be looking at things like Swan Song before you're looking at things like Negate, and the idea is you're like I said before, where there's kind of like this baseline of, well, seems like most decks run somewhere between 8 and 13 counter spells. It seems like most decks run somewhere between 5 and 9 tutors. And like I do go through the decks on the database, and I kind of keep tabs on the numbers as far as what slots they're committing to what, and kind of use that as the baseline to have like that first draft of, okay, well, this is the amount of interaction that I'm going to start with. This is the amount of tutoring I'm going to start with, rocks, and so on and so forth. Then once you're there, that's just the kind of like the skeleton. Those are just kind of like the bones, because every deck is going to need to have interaction. Every deck is going to need to have tutors, and so on and so forth. From there, the things that are special about the deck are what are going to inform kind of the rest of what you're doing. So if you're on Inala, then that is going to suggest, okay, you're going to start using maybe some wizards that wouldn't normally make the cut, but because of the advantage that you can get through the Eminence ability, maybe that will embolden you to bring in some of those cards, because in that context they can be really good. And then you maybe, if you're on Yarok or something, you're gonna in the same way, you're gonna look at cards that are something that is specific either to the commander, or cards that lend themselves well to the like the patterns of play that you're trying to put together. So if the pattern of play that you're looking to establish is Turbo Naz, then that's going to inform the choices for the kinds of things that you're going to put into the deck. Turbo Naz means that you're going to sacrifice some of your slots that are interaction slots, and instead you're going to commit those to faster acceleration. You're going to have higher density of rituals. You're going to have higher density of rocks that are, or ways of generating mana that are, zero state, so that you can so that either you can get your Naz off the ground faster, or once your Naz has completed, you don't have to have any mana left over to be able to continue going. You start from 0 and keep going. But the constraints that come from the type of game that you want to play will inform the choices that you make, as far as what cards you're going to also add into the mix beyond just the skeleton. Right. And also those things as well will push some of those things from the skeleton out. So Turbo Naz. Okay. So you're probably not going to have 13 counter spells. You're going to take down some of those counter spells, and you're going to try to reduce your average CMC as much as possible, so that you can get the most profitable Nazes that you can. So that's going to push out some of the cards that are more reactive. It's going to push out the cards that are higher CMC in favor of things that are lower. So those are the kinds of things that will dictate the kind of the ebb and flow of what content you have inside that list. Right. And sometimes, I don't feel bad about looking at EDH rec, if somebody said, hey, can you put together a Calamax list? Because his copying ability has some interesting things that we want to try to explore. Okay, I have no problem going to EDH rec and seeing what are other people doing. What kind of cards. Even if there's a card that only really is going to work in casual, it might trigger something when you see it. Oh, wait a minute! There's like a way far. There's a more optimal way that we could do this with this other card that they're not considering, but we could do it in a different way.
Did you see I don't know if you saw this on Twitter or not. I posted it. I was looking for different like combos and stuff earlier today. And I was on EDH rec and I was like, what blue-white combos are out there? I don't even know. And I saw the Shabraz, the Sky Shark, and Drog Skull Reaver. And
oh my goodness, that's the 7 mana white and blue that has double strike, and whenever you gain life, draw a card.
Yep.
Oh my.
And so those two, you literally just draw your deck. And I was sitting there and I was like, what if I played Sneak Attack with that?
Right.
And then you just like threw it in. Like there's probably a better way of doing that. But
sure.
That was something I thought was hilarious.
Right. The idea there though is just because someone who is coming from a casual mindset is coming up with the idea doesn't make it a bad idea.
Right.
And it doesn't even mean that it's not an idea that can actually bear fruit in a more competitive metagame. So, EDH rec. If you're looking for something that's like off the wall, but if you're looking for something that is kind of more seasoned and more kind of established, that is going to be something that's good for for competitive. I mean, looking at the deck list database that you can get to from Reddit and from other places. I mean, those are the decks that are the decks. So looking at what choices are they making for the counter spells that they're taking? Right. What are the choices that they're making for the acceleration they're choosing? What are their choices for which interaction pieces that they're including and which interaction pieces they're not including? That can help give you some insight into the stuff that works in different contexts. And that context is important as well. So right. if you're wanting to play a stacks deck, then you probably shouldn't start with the farm decks to look at the cards that you should be including, but the farm decks will help inform the choices you make of how you can hate against those farm decks.
Right.
But if you went and looked at Blood Pod, then maybe that's going to give you some better choices as to the things that might work well within that archetype. So you want to try to look at other decks that are of similar archetype and see the things that they're doing and which things will be appropriate for the deck that you're putting together.
Right. Yeah. I totally love that. And and I know you've mentioned this before, but I mean, you even look at MTG top 8 and like Goldfish and stuff like that too, to see like what Legacy and all those people are doing.
Yes, I do. Because there's sometimes there's just things that are the way that things have been done, or the ways that things are currently being done in Death and Taxes in Modern or in Legacy, or the way that Shops is approaching their gameplay in Vintage today or 5 years ago. The choices that they were making, they're not going to translate verbatim into cEDH, but they can give you ideas of, oh, wait a minute, I never would have thought of trying something like that.
Right.
And that's really the idea there, is to try to look for things that maybe we haven't tried out in a couple of years. And a lot of times you'll have cards that either have fallen out of favor or that were really good, and then for whatever reason, either something else got really strong or something else drew everybody's attention away. People just stopped playing it, not because it was bad, not because it couldn't compete, just because something else drew people's attention away from it. And then you'll find, so like there was an era like a year or two ago when nobody ran Ristic Study.
I remember that. That was so weird.
The motherhood and apple pie kind of notion was that, well, everyone knows that Ristic Study is not fast enough. You 3 mana for something that isn't necessarily going to be able to generate some number of cards. And people rationalized their way out of why they weren't including it, and now it's a near universal include, even for really aggressive fast decks. There's merit in going and looking at things that have worked in the past,
right,
to see if the context has changed such that they can once again have a future. If that makes sense.
No, that's really awesome. So now once we've got all our stuff together, we've got our initial lists. Obviously it comes down to, we got to play test this, right?
Right. So what I do is, before I ever actually play it against other people, I will do a lot of gold fishing, and what I'll do is I'll just load it up into Cockatrice. And when I say a lot of gold fishing, I will probably do between 200 or 300 runs of trying to get to a desired game state. And for every single run, I'll answer what felt good. First of all, the first is, what was the win con? How did I win? So just to see if you roll through 50 times and you included 2 win cons in your deck and you used 1 win con 85% of the time, it might inform you that, well, maybe we should reinforce the lines
more.
Yeah, let's sculpt things a little bit more so that we're able to do that more reliably, since that seems to be the place that we're going to go anyway. Or it could mean that, okay, is there a way that we could make pivoting between these two things more economical or more equitable, such that maybe the other one sees play more often? There may be reasons to go in either direction, let's say.
So how do you, and I even, as a deck creator, how in the world, okay, let's say you're sitting down and you're goldfishing my deck, Lavinia, right? Because this is a thing I struggle with. How in the world, because especially with a deck like this that's so circumstantial, every choice I make is, especially when I'm playing 13 counters, right, is based on what is the board state, what's going. I mean, how do you goldfish that? Okay,
so one of the things that you can do is to kind of have an imaginary set of opponents.
Okay.
So what you can do is, okay, for this game, I'm going to imagine that I'm playing against 2 farm decks and a Godo deck or something like that. And what you would do is for every turn during that game, you're going to be thinking, if you're playing, excuse me, if you're playing a stacks deck, for instance, okay, what am I doing against? What am I doing to hold Godo off of winning?
Right.
And what things do I want to be doing every single turn to make sure that the farm players aren't playing the game that they want to play?
Right.
And I mean, it's not going to be the same as actually playing against people, but the purpose of gold fishing by yourself is to make sure that all of the lines of the deck have cohesion and that the deck itself functions efficiently.
Right.
Because there'll be times that you'll be like, ooh, man, that line just it felt really rough to make that work. And like I was saying, whenever you finish a game, you're going to say how you won, but then what felt good as far as what cards felt good in hand and you were happy to see. What felt bad, where it was like, oh, why am I seeing this in my hand? And which things were missing that you felt like you needed, that had you had that, you would have been able to combo out when you wanted to, or had you had that, you would have been able to have something to be able to stop the imaginary Godo player that was to your right. By kind of keeping track of all of those things, you'll see patterns that'll show up where it was like, yeah, living plain felt really bad a lot of the time, and you'll find yourself making it. It helps you to have the data to make choices. If a lot of people make choices based on gut, and some people have really good gut sense, and that's great. I like to make my choices based on data. Yeah. And by doing a lot of gold fishing kind of on your own and being ruthless and being honest about what stuff works and what stuff doesn't, which things you need to change, that helps you to kind of get the deck into a state where it's ready to go against real people. So when you're playing it against real people, you're not trying to work out the kinks of stuff that you could already figure out. Okay. So you figure out the kinks that you can on your own, and then that stuff has been resolved when you're taking it to play against real people. Then when you're playing against real people, you can focus and not have to deal with, oh yeah, living plain feels bad. You don't have those moments. Instead, it's, oh man, I wish maybe one or two more pieces of removal are needed. Because I felt like I didn't have the removal as often as I needed to, or those kinds of things. And that's a thing. I don't know how many people do this, but taking notes after games that's just a good practice. So if you finish up a game and you won, or you finished up a game and you lost, taking some notes on like what did I learn from this? Will A, make you a better player, and B, give you insight into how you can maybe make the deck better.
And so especially when, so I want to play against people. What is it you do to play with other people?
I will most often play with people on Spell Table currently. Okay. So I've got kind of a local metagame of, people who live close by. We don't play face to face, but we play on Spell Table. Okay. But I'll also play, with other people through the organized games that take place on Nexus, and through semi-organized games that take place on Cockatrice as well. Okay. And that's just helpful in general for playing cEDH, just because not every local game store is going to have a bunch of people that are maybe as devoted or as invested in cEDH. So if I am really
incredibly lucky with that.
Right. If you want to diversify the people that you're playing against, then using the internet as a resource is the way to do that.
Well, that about wraps things up for us here this week. Thank you again for tuning in for this visit back to our first episode all the way back in October of 2020. If you liked this episode or any of our other episodes, please make sure to rate this show on whatever podcast platform you are listening on. And if you're listening on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and tell us down in the comments what your favorite part of the show was. I also would like to thank our top tier patrons, Justin, Adam Hamden, David Snavely, Dionysius, Graydon Goodenough, Jacob Turan, Jason Bialk, Matt Boehner, and Senior Coupon. If you too would like to support the show, you can head on over to patreon.com/The Mind Sculptors or check out the link in the description. Thank you again for joining us, and from all of us here at The Mind Sculptors, I'm Callahan, and we'll see you next time.